Hi everybody and welcome to today's ISE webinar. My name is Steve Isherwood, Chief Exec of the ISE, and I'm going to be acting as sort of host and compere for today. I'm really pleased to be introducing this webinar, really pleased to have Blackbridge on board, one of our supplier partners, about the support of organisations like Blackbridge and being able to work together closely on things like this. We won't be able to provide half the content that we do. I'm very shortly going to hand over to the two Bens who will be leading us through the bulk of the content today, but just a little reminder about how our webinars work if you haven't been on one before. Today we're talking about cutting through the online noise, how social media works, how to attract students and graduates in this very noisy and complex online market that we now operate in. It's a lot more complicated than it was when I started back in the day. We've got the chat function enabled and the Q&A. I'll be keeping an eye on those throughout the session. We've got time at the end to deal with any questions that you might have for Ben and Ben. So if you just pop them into there, I'll keep an eye on them, and then I'll feed them through at the end. And if you've got anything you want to chat, anything you want to sort of pass comment on as we go along, we'll be keeping an eye on that as well. So please do engage. Let's make this as interactive as possible. Right, let's get stuck straight into the content. That's what you've all logged on for. Ben, over to you.
It's nice and easy for you, Stephen, isn't it? You just have to say Ben, and one of us will respond. So I thought I'd start by doing a little bit of a brief introduction as to who we are, where we come from, and there'll be a very short bit about Blackbridge, and then we're going to dive straight into the detail of the presentation today. So I'm Ben Nunn. I've been working in this industry for my sins for the best part of 25 years, most of which has been in the digital arena. So I've seen quite a lot of these channels launch and seen how organisations have used them over the years. And Ben is working with us as a social media consultant. He's been working in social media for about 15 years, so brings a lot of experience with him from sort of what works, what doesn't, and trends and techniques that we can apply to help our clients get the most out of social media. So that's a brief intro. If I start talking about Blackbridge as an organisation, some of you may know who we are, but basically we're an independent specialist operating in the employer branding space. There's about 35 of us. I think one of our USPs is that we're employee owned, which means every employee of the agency has a stake in the business and a vested interest in delivering great work for our clients. We switched to that about 2.5 years ago, and that's been a really successful move for us. We're based in the UK, in central London, but we actually work with a lot of clients internationally and are one of the lead agencies in the one agent global network that gives us access to experts around the world to help our clients with their attraction activities. And we're a fully integrated business, which means that we have pretty much all of the services that you'd require under one roof, which helps a lot. And when it comes to how we approach our work with clients, we like to refer to it as the 3 C's. And put simply, we consult with organisations to understand what it is that we need to be saying, how we want to say it, etc. We then support by identifying channels, so the where the message needs to go, and then the how is the creative piece, how we put that message across for our clients. And that seems to work very successfully for us and our clients, and is a system that we've been working with for quite a while now. And when it comes to our clients, we don't specialise in one particular area. I'll press the next slide there. We have clients across a number of different sectors. And this helps us sort of really get a full understanding of what's working in the market and then be able to share that with our clients. There's a lot of household names on there, and we work with them on various different levels, depending on their specific needs. Quite a few of those work with us from a social perspective. So I'm going to hand over to Ben Fox, who's now going to talk us through the social media landscape and give you a little bit of insight on that subject.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, very interesting to work on this. I think, so I've worked in social, as Ben said, for about 15 years. It's changed dramatically, and it continues to change. When I started, it was very much kind of forums, blogs, scraping that content, figuring out what social was. It's now in a place where there's been channels that have come and gone, content types that have come and gone, and just different techniques that used to work and used to be great, now don't, and new things come and go. So yeah, it's been interesting working on this for a couple of reasons. One, I guess because social is one of the newer areas of the sort of marketing mix, and so it naturally goes through that cycle of innovation quicker. So it is worth keeping up to date with all of this, and that's why working on this has been great, because it's been a really interesting insight into sort of social in the student sphere. So I'll take you through some of the core channels to start with, some of the basics. Point to yourself if you know these channels. Some of them are more obvious and ones that you might use on a day-to-day basis. So obviously we're looking at the likes of Facebook, which is undoubtedly still the largest social network of all. Approximately 3 billion users worldwide on that platform. Lots of content over the last 10 years saying how Facebook has died a death. It never does, it always comes back stronger. And they have obviously in the last sort of 5 years added Instagram to their Meta portfolio, a huge channel, particularly when we're thinking about students, and it's a very visual channel that you know incorporates everything that is about modern day social media. Twitter, now part owned by Elon Musk, huge in the news at the moment. Not particularly huge in all areas, but a very good channel when it comes to tech and gaming in particular. LinkedIn obviously was the go-to channel for a lot of employer branding comms many years ago, but we've added to that portfolio now. It's still the largest professional networking platform. They continue to add different functionalities to company pages and advertising platforms, so it's always worth knowing and keeping up to date with that channel. YouTube, undoubtedly the biggest video platform that's ever existed, currently owned by Google, approximately 2 billion users worldwide, and TikTok, which is one of the newer players to social media, a much younger demographic, approximately over 1 billion downloads in the last few years, and it markets itself as an entertainment provider as opposed to a social network, so it's slightly different. Snapchat was big, still is big, but the growth has slightly slowed on that platform. It does have great functionality when it comes to filter adoption. Pinterest, still a big platform when it comes to visuals, particularly prominent in if you're looking to target female audiences. Slightly less considered would be Reddit, currently owned by Condé Nast. Lots of users in the millions. Very much a discussion forum and news forum. Lots of subreddits exist, and we'll talk a little bit about how those micro communities might have a play when it comes to social strategy. And then a few channels that maybe aren't always considered as widely. So WhatsApp, while being a channel that you can discuss topics with your friends and family, also there's a business for WhatsApp social network that businesses are using to discuss different topics with people. It's very much a broadcast channel at the moment, but now that it sits within the Meta family, you can expect there to be a lot more advertising opportunities in the coming future. And the last two, a little bit slightly unknown, but when it comes to Twitch, Twitch is a huge live streaming and gaming platform. It's massive with influencers, and it's really one that is still upcoming and has shown massive growth in the last couple of years. And the final one is Discord, which is a gaming forum, and it might seem like it's only for gamers, but actually there's lots and lots of young audiences on there talking about games, talking about different things, and it's a great way to add. It's a great new channel actually to have in the mix when it comes to social channels for your marketing. So it won't surprise you to know when you look at this table where students, and in particular this size, UK students spend their time on social media. So Instagram, Snapchat, leading the way very much when it comes to time spent on those platforms. Facebook is still a huge channel for younger people, so not to be discounted. And then there's a sort of secondary group of channels that young people are spending a lot of time on, which are TikTok, WhatsApp, and YouTube. And then slightly further down, when we get into the low digit figures, we're looking at Twitter, Reddit, LinkedIn and Pinterest. So that is where UK students spend their time when they're thinking about social media. Interestingly, when it comes to consumption, there aren't lots and lots of research papers around when it comes to looking at where young people spend time, students in particular spend time on social. There are some interesting reports, and what we've done here is sort of compiled some of those and given you a bit of a sort of brand consideration of what you should be considering and how to use some of this information. So when it comes to 16 to 24-year-olds, they can be active on up to 8 social media platforms. Slightly more for females, slightly less for males, but on average, 8 social media platforms are where sort of students are spending their time. So what does this mean in terms of for your marketing? Well, it's probably a case of having a sort of a strategic approach for anything when it comes to which platforms do you need a presence on. Many of the more modern day platforms, as we'll talk about, don't require you necessarily to have a sort of consistent content stream running across the platform, but you can run advertising across them. So it's interesting to note that young people are spending lots of time on lots of different channels. And as the age brackets increase, people tend to be present on less channels. So there's more to consider when it comes to how you get the best return on investment. From my experience, I'd say I would focus on 1 to 2 core channels to start with, rather than spreading yourself across lots, and focusing down on content that works across those channels. Interestingly and unsurprisingly, 16 to 24-year-olds spend the most amount of time per day using social platforms than any other age bracket. So as you can see here, the bars on the left show you that approximately 3 hours roughly per day spent on social media. Females slightly more than males across all the age brackets, which is quite interesting. However, since 2018, these numbers haven't gone up, so we're not seeing that as sort of more people join the 16 to 24 pool, that time goes up. It has very much plateaued since 2018. When it comes to sort of a brand consideration, there's obviously we need to think more about how we actually engage people that are spending time on those social platforms. There's a sort of mini model that I sort of like to think about when I'm putting together anything, which is, does this content or does what we're doing across our social channels engage people? Does it educate them or does it inspire them in any way? If it doesn't tick at least one of those boxes, it's probably because it's a broadcast marketing message and therefore it probably won't capture the audience's attention enough to stop them scrolling on the feed and to give them a chance to pay attention to what you're trying to get them to do. Social media does represent, for 16 to 24-year-olds, roughly a third of the time that they spend overall online. So that is very similar to the 25 to 34-year-old bracket. So when it comes to genders, again, females do spend more time on social out of all of the time that they spend online. So about a third of the time is spent on social channels. When I guess what this means is social in isolation is only going to hit people a third of the amount of time that they're online. So from a strategic perspective, we always recommend incorporating other areas of digital marketing into the mix. You can't rely on social, as we're going to talk about, for conversion alone. Social very much sort of sits at that awareness and consideration piece, and you'll need other digital marketing sort of methods to capture people into the conversion part of that funnel and to keep people engaged. Gender does play a slight role, a very, very slight role when it comes to 16 to 24-year-olds. When they were asked to choose their favourite social media platforms, it's not really a surprise. Instagram is number one. It is where people spend most of their time. The only real difference here is the switch that you'll notice in third place between females seem to enjoy TikTok more and males tend to enjoy Facebook more. So there is a slight bias towards some of those channels, but again, Instagram is really where people of that age bracket are enjoying spending time. So the obvious brand consideration here is that rather than spreading everything across multiple channels, really consider where people do spend time and where people want to spend time. So when we're thinking about, say, for example, if you build a monthly content calendar, the sort of go-to usually is, right, we'll have a post on Facebook, a post on Twitter, a post on Instagram, a post on LinkedIn. Well, this data sort of shows you that actually you should probably be focusing on channels where people enjoy spending more time. So look into how you can post more on Instagram, or certainly put more resource and effort into those channels where we know people will be more engaged and want to spend time. In terms of 16 to 24-year-olds, as a source for news, they tend not to go to social, which is interesting. There isn't really any information as to why that is. My assumption would be because of a lack of trust, a slight sort of minefield of misinformation, as I put here. I think social does tend to have, it is quite an opinion-based platform, as most sort of social experiences are, and therefore news, fake news, and so on, misinformation cannot always be trusted. So younger people are not using it as a source of news, which is an interesting insight into the type of content that you would produce typically. I suppose if you're thinking about a post on your LinkedIn company page, for example, would you have a sort of very corporate post, or would you make it something that was a lot more value driven and based around something that an audience would be interested in? Well, this information sort of tells us that they're less driven by news and less interested in company news and more interested in other areas of content types. Young people also, unsurprisingly, are using social to discover brands and discover new brands. So whether from an employer brand perspective, your brand is widely known or not, it is a place where young people will go to discover things and to work things out and to figure if it suits their lifestyle and their personality and the type of goals that they have in their life. So you can see young people tend to dominate this category again. Social media does compare to TV, so people also are still tuning into TV, not so much live TV, but more broad, catch up. Newspapers dramatically drops off, and so does radio when it comes to younger people and how they discover new things. I guess the consideration here really is to sort of go above and beyond when it comes to keeping your social platforms, the ones that you're going to focus on, keeping them populated and making sure that you have got all of the information that you think somebody would want to know. So whether that is what it's like to work at your organisation, whether it's your current roles, I think always kind of my go-to advice across this type of area is always go back to the basics. I think often we think because we've posted something once, everybody's seen it. That's not the case. We can repurpose content a lot, and I think that's always a really good idea because we don't know when people are going to see it or when they're going to be searching necessarily. And yeah, it seems like a sort of a sensible thing to do, to go back to basics, because while we work in the companies that we work in and we know our sort of roles and what it's like to work inside out, lots of people don't. And from a research perspective, they will want to know the absolute basics up to the absolute advanced information as well. Influencers might seem like a very kind of consumer and B2C tool, but it does have a role to play. So approximately 1/3 of females follow at least one influencer. I'd say that's probably quite low, but I'd assume it's probably actually a lot higher than this now. For males, it's about 1/4. There's definitely a place for influencers when it comes to student marketing. We know that from other research that influencers have a huge role to play when it comes to spreading awareness, and particularly kind of getting people interested that might not have been interested from just a corporate message. So there's definitely scope to work with influencers. Influencers tend to have a pretty negative rap when it comes to cost. There are lots of influencers now that aren't working with talent agencies that can be, paid for, and that don't have to cost thousands of pounds. But there is a sort of manual effort of researching and contacting them and so on. But there's definitely a point to play when it comes to including this and having it as a bit of a standout from what your competitors might be doing, which is not using them. And when it comes to advertising, so 18 to 24-year-olds, which is what we can advertise to, make up approximately 1/5 of the overall population of most social networks when it comes to advertising opportunities, or certainly the platforms that we'd want to advertise on for young people. So you can see from the charts below, there are certain platforms. Snapchat is one, Instagram is another, and TikTok would be a great one as well, where there's a very heavy population of 18 to 24-year-olds that have opted into being advertised to, and those channels are ones that we sort of recommend quite regularly when it comes to this type of audience. There's quite a sort of split in terms of male-female. If you're looking at a particularly female-focused platform advertising campaign, Pinterest and TikTok are really where you should be focusing, because this is where we see a very high proportion of advertising opt-in when it comes to that gender. And again, I think all of this information used together, all of these slides that you've just seen are really kind of important. So when it comes to looking at advertising, have a look at the types of gender splits, have a look at the types of favorite channels that people are spending time on, and compare it to some of this advertising data, and it will give you almost a sort of strategy on a page in terms of how you should be focusing and where you should be focusing your time, rather than splitting it across multiple channels equally. So that is that section, just in terms of a recap. So 16 to 20-year-olds present on approximately 8 social channels. Most of their time, they spend most time on social platforms compared to any other age bracket. More than 1/3 of their time online is spent on social platforms. Instagram and WhatsApp are definitely the favourites. They're least likely to use it as a news source. Around 50% are using it for brand research. 1/3 of females follow an influencer, and 1/4 of those of males also follow at least one. And they do make up 1/5 of the advertising potential when it comes to those social networks. So in terms of standing out, I guess this is interesting because, there are certain times in the calendar year when all brands will want to get these sort of young people, whether it's apprenticeships like this week or grads. First of all, I guess there's a bit of a myth when it comes to sort of students. An interesting piece of research by the Centre of Attention Studies at King's College London, which is well worth a read, actually, at least the synopsis, outlines a very interesting case that there's a myth going around that young people have a lower attention span than any other age bracket or at any other time since it was recorded. That's not true. Lots of people have a slightly lower attention span. All age brackets are prone to picking up their phone between 20 and 40 times a day, being distracted, looking at different things, not being able to concentrate. That is a societal problem. It's not a young person problem. If your content on social, for example, is not being viewed as much as you want, it's probably because your content needs tweaking and optimizing, and some of the channels you're putting it out on need to do the same. There's certain behavioural factors as well that come into that when it comes to younger people that we need to consider. So I'll take you through a few trends, sort of top line trends, to get you thinking. So there's something out there called algorithmic anxiety. It's a slight opposite to older age groups, where older age groups like to be recommended to. Younger age groups are slightly less inclined for that to be recommended to. So they often feel it dulls their individualism, and it's something that they're sort of not always wanting to see. So those are the sort of pages where you go onto TikTok and you go onto the For Your Page channel, and it's all the recommended content that's got millions of views. Everybody's seen it, everybody's looking at it, but other people want to see things that potentially are a little bit different. In terms of social, what does that mean? So it means that discovery-friendly content, so search-friendly content, has become more popular than ever before. Yes, that means using certain types of hashtags. It also means looking up different search terms and hashtags before you post something, so you know what people are looking for, and so on and so on. And lots of young people are choosing to sort of search different things that don't have as many likes. It also means from a, and we'll move on to a sort of cynical thing later, but it also means that sort of honest and unbranded reviews and collaborations are a lot more popular now than sort of influencer-led, like big, million follower influencer-led campaigns. People like to see live streams, they like to see reactions, and they want to see things that feel real and very authentic. Interesting stat from the United Nations futurist Matt Klein, who is definitely worth looking at. He's a very interesting guy. He did some research recently that came out with the stat: 62% of people want streaming and social platforms to recommend unpopular content. So people want to feel like they are discovering things by themselves. They want to see things that not everyone else has seen, and that backs up that stat very much. Trends to note. So as we mentioned before, TikTok is very much a social network entertainment provider, but it is also a search engine. I was a little bit skeptical of this previously until I typed into TikTok how to fix a broken tap. It came up with loads of options, all different types of taps, all the different types of fittings, fixings, etc. Lots of different lengths of content. It's a very, very big search engine now, and young people are using it over Google in many instances. As I said previously, that people are in the pursuit of being an individual. They want to see stuff that is unseen. They want to see things that they might not necessarily always see. And that's the same for employed brand, right? They want to see inside of your organization like they've never seen before. They want to see things that aren't just Glassdoor reviews. They want to see what it's actually really, really like to work there. And the combination of in real life and online emotional experiences is very important to these people. They want to see and understand things as well online as they would offline, in the same example. And it doesn't always mean kind of high-end experiential pieces, but it means having a sort of consistent approach to what you do online and what you do offline. I enjoyed this one, a rise in cynicism. Young people want to see a shift to real content, and that means moving away from influencer poser types and anything that may be seen as disingenuous, which is a sort of trend like no other. Follows slightly what we talked about in terms of fake news and misinformation. How does that translate on social? So it means balancing, if you are using influencers, really think about who you're going to use. If you are putting out content, make sure it is authentic, make sure it it genuinely would be something that is factual. And it needs balancing the two of those so that people don't just have a very glossy idea of what it's like to work there or what it's like to live in a certain place and so on and so on. There's an interesting social network called Be Real. Most of you probably heard of it in the student field, but it's very interesting. It's a French social network originally. It's now global in most continents. It's essentially a sort of picture app, a picture-based app where you take a picture that's, you know, sort of just of that moment, and it doesn't have to have filters. It doesn't have to have lots of things, you know, sort of over the top of it. It's just a real life picture, and you take them over time, and then you have a sort of photo bank of moments that happen in your life, and that is really translating with younger audiences. Trends in terms of this, we talked about it a little bit with Reddit, Discord, Twitch, those kind of micro channels. But micro communities are sort of more culturally relevant now to younger people than ever before. That's where they like to spend time, and it feels to them, from what I've read, more like an experience and less like a corporate ad. So that is something to bear in mind. People also want to see passion and motivation. They don't want to see product pushing. They want to see people that care, people that, you know, are genuinely passionate about what they do, and workplaces that are the same. They don't want to just be pushed out roles constantly or told things that just aren't true. And there's also a trend of middle grounding. So middle grounding is now seen as a form of advertising. So people want to see a positive or negative emotion around things. They don't just want a corporate statement. They want to see something that feels authentic. We'll whiz through this one, but social and media becoming two entities. It's definitely the case that social media in modern era of social, sort of TikTok, Snapchat, and Be Real type channels are very much kind of entertainment platforms now, as opposed to isolated networks. TikTok itself describes itself as an entertainment platform. So it's very much about entertaining, finding out information, discovering, more than it is about getting followers and building up sort of likes on end. And on social, it means creating a hub for conversation is probably less important now than ever before. So previously it would have been a case, you know, we're going back years now, but where you would have built maybe a forum onto your website and hope that some people came and had a conversation for a while. That's no longer the case, and it's no longer the case with social networks. People do at this age want entertainment in their lives. And like I said, you know, Discord and Reddit have reported huge growth in the last couple of years. TikTok as well, which is the fastest growing social network. Communal trends post-pandemic are more important than individual ones now. Younger people are pushing towards more community efforts than solo missions and games of tag. So if you remember, the Ice Bucket Challenge is a good example of a sort of game of tag where people enjoy that, but I think they want to do things together. And it's also worth thinking about gaming. So gaming is a huge area that often balances entertainment and education. So gamification around anything now is critical to getting that sort of time spent on a platform or time spent on your content up as much as possible. And another sort of trend with younger people is around identity expression. So there are lots of examples, if you've got younger children, that you'll know of in terms of sort of how they can self-express and create an identity in those types of virtual worlds. Genres and crossovers are more important than ever before. So you'll see lots of young people sort of looking at content that's based around sort of subgenres, and for example, imagine an influencer collaboration, but with a topic that you wouldn't expect, and they're doing something unusual. That's interesting to people. It's something a bit different. And also, you know, to go back to the virtual worlds, it's all driven by discovery and exploration and learning, rather than brand force feeding. When it comes to virtual worlds, diversity is a huge factor, and representation being part of that is huge, and it continues to be huge. Channels like Depop, Vinted, and so on, they're interesting channels. They've given people that form of self-expression and identity creation like never before. You can open your own store, you can sell what you want, you can use your own picture, create an avatar. It's all about you, and it's all about the way you want to express yourself. And then, like I said, you know, Discord, Twitch, and Roblox as well. They're all in where interactions are happening, but identity is taken into account, and that is why people are spending a lot more time. ESG is a huge factor. You know, gone are the days of sort of a couple of press releases on a corporate website. This has to be filtered in through you know, all of the content you do, whether that's DE&I, whether it's sort of more environmental topics. People want to see real change. They don't want to see things that feel unreal and things that feel like they're just not true. And the metaverse is something that you know, it's an interesting new shiny tool, right? People want to jump on those new sort of shiny tools. I just sort of with cautious you know, thoughts, I would say be careful sort of spending all of your time and all of your money into this sort of untested environment. It's an interesting place to play and to discover and to learn, but I certainly wouldn't put all of my eggs in that basket while it's an undeveloped area. I would recommend having a look, if you want an example, of the Pedigree Fosterverse, which is exactly what it sounds like. You go on and you adopt a virtual dog in a virtual world. And that's an interesting campaign. It requires a lot of money. It requires a lot of time and resource. Not something I personally recommend, but I think it's an interesting example of how that sort of real life is fading into the online world. Cool. I think you've had enough from me, so I'm going to pass back to Ben.
Yeah, and I just thought I'd close out with a sort of 10 thoughts to consider when it comes to any sort of social media activity. And these aren't, I don't think any of these are rocket science in terms of their statements, but they are things that we often find ourselves having to remind organisations to just bring them back to these principles, because they're really important when it comes to planning any sort of activity in the social space. So first and foremost, and we've sort of covered this off, but always think about the audience first and what they need. And this is sometimes, I think, something that gets missed when organisations get a little bit focused on what they want to tell people. Actually, you want to tell people what the audience needs to hear and tell them in a way that they need to be sort of shown and told it. And it's quite a useful principle to apply to any content. And if we move on to the next one, don't try and be something you're not. Try and be you, because that's what people want to understand. That's what your audiences or students want to understand. And you need to be more natural and be comfortable and confident in who you are and who you're not. We say don't try to be a student here. I think that's a pretty fair statement around the way that we should be using these platforms. Next, when it comes to actually using social, consider what you're going to be doing and why you're doing it. And often asking the question why, and then looking at the content that you might be planning on posting. It might be that you've got content in a calendar just to fill a hole, but actually it's not adding any value. And if it's not really adding a lot of value, then your audiences aren't going to engage with it. They're almost going to disengage. And this can create a bit of a risk to other valuable content that they may associate with unvaluable content, and therefore sort of switch off a little bit. So consider what you're doing and why. It's really important. When it comes to using social media, it's not a last minute quick fix. It's something that should be planned as any other media channel should be, and any other attraction activity should be. And there should be a strategy and some clear themes behind the content that you're presenting, so that there's actually, you're using it as a tool to get your messages out to the market in the way that the audience wants to receive it. Don't sort of use it as a bit of a plugging a gap right at the end of something that hasn't worked and then hope it will work, because it probably won't. It's a busy old space out there and it can quite easily get lost. And when it's coming up to actually thinking about the channels that you use, again, think about the ones that are best for the purpose that you need to use them for. We're not fans of opening multiple social media channels for the sake of it because somebody's mentioned it somewhere. There's insight and understanding of who's using it, where they're using it, how they're using it. And actually, often what you can be doing is using the channels that you have already in a more creative and more engaging way by considering different tactics that you can apply. So again, don't keep opening channels because you think you need to. TikTok's a big one. If you want to do paid social or paid advertising on TikTok, you don't actually need a TikTok channel to do it. You don't need the resource to support the channel. You can actually go out to market and target content without actually having a channel in place, which is a bit of a shift compared to what the market used to do. And it's something that we're keeping an eye on, whether other channels are sort of following suit, but it's useful so that you don't spread yourselves too thin. When it comes to supporting your audience and offering value to their lives, try and make sure that you are creating content that does this, and you're not just broadcasting beige marketing messages that you're using elsewhere. These channels have specific purposes, specific uses. Make sure that your content that you push out plays to their strengths and isn't just recycling something that's been used in several other locations because it's easy. It's not always going to get you the most bang for your buck, should we say. And speaking of bang for your buck, when it comes to reaching audiences, we all know this, I'm sure, but targeted paid social is your friend and should be used effectively. Organic content sometimes has a very limited reach in people's feeds, but actually if we can understand the audience that we're looking to target, you can certainly get your content out in a far more focused way. That means that you're actually reaching the right people with the right message at the right time. It's sort of obvious, but sometimes it's almost a bit of an add-on rather than a consideration of the overall approach. When it comes to social, again, this isn't going to surprise anybody, but make sure that you're reporting and you're looking at the data regularly to make sure that what you're doing is optimized. Because again, it's nice to get a report that you can share with a stakeholder in the business, but if you're not looking at it and then using that insight to develop and grow your social activity, then you may as well not have those reports really. And there's a lot of data. There's almost too much data at times, but it's understanding what data matters and then discounting the volumes of data that don't matter and that don't really impact what you're doing so that you can focus on the little bits of data that will really add value to your activity. And then I think we're almost at the last one. I've got two more to go. When it comes to social, I think Ben picked up on this earlier, don't consider it as almost like a standalone tool that works on its own. It needs to be part of your overall mix. It needs to be considered as part of your overall strategy and used to play to its strengths and build that relationship and build that message and that route to market that perhaps other channels aren't able to offer you. And then when it comes to integrating it, also consider that the way you use it, again, is right for the market and the audience that are on those platforms. So tailor messages subtly. You may be using the same creative, but the way that you create the narrative around that creative should be tailored to engage with the audiences that are on those channels. And then finally, it's a case of consider the full breadth, but don't necessarily just go down this route of panic. Someone said we should have a TikTok channel, let's launch it. Someone said we should be on this platform or that platform. It comes back to understanding how these media channels evolve, how the tools and the components that you have on these channels can be used, and also how you measure what effectiveness looks like. And often, if you almost revisit what certain platforms that you already have in place are doing and how they're using them, you'll find a lot of the answers are within a smaller group of channels that you've already got quite a strong presence on, but you're maybe not using them as effectively as you could be because you're not aware of some of the tools or the tactics that can now be applied. And these platforms are evolving at a sort of hell of a pace. We all know that. I think it's more a case of just making sure that you're up to date with what they can do and how they work. And that is almost the end of our presentation. We just thought we'd drop in some contact details at the end here for anybody who might want to follow up on this or get in touch with us. But I think I'm pretty impressed that we are bang on time. 15 minutes of Q&A at the end, Stephen. I'm quite proud of that delivery.
That is very impressive. Ben, thank you very much. Really good content. I just can't get over how complex the social media space has become. I'm just going to show you my age. I remember when Facebook was just sort of edging onto the scene and nobody had the faintest idea what it was. So luckily I've got a 16-year-old daughter that keeps me fresh, hence the posting on Be Real. I thought, what are you doing? I said, oh, it's Be Real. And it took a bit of explaining for me to get my head around it. So we've got plenty of questions coming through. That's great. One of the questions was around slides and recording of this. We are recording the session, so we will we'll send out a link to you, and it'll also go onto the website. And I'm sure Ben, you'll be happy to supply the slides. We can send those out as well. So I've got a mixture of questions on the chat and also in the Q&A box. So that's what I'm looking at. If I go sideways, I'm not staring out the window, getting distracted. So the first question is around, and I know you covered a bit of this, but I think it's probably worth expanding on as well, around student engagement and whether it's better through posts or stories on Facebook and Instagram. Which works better out of those two?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a combo of both, to be honest. I was always going to say that, but I think a combo of both really is probably a good idea. I mean, there is no formula, right? I can't give you a sort of exact formula. So brand by brand, category by category, it's going to be different. Facebook stories don't tend to perform that well overall, and that's the same for organic and paid. I would always recommend, if you are posting on Instagram, to create a sort of suite of content that goes alongside that for stories, because stories do perform well and they get really, really high view rates, really high engagement rates as well. And that can be, for example, let's imagine you're launching a sort of 1-minute video and you put that as a post. You may want to have a sort of suite of 4 or 5 stories that you can post to direct people to that content, because a lot of people go on Instagram and they just look at the stories, they don't want to endlessly scroll. So yeah, a combo of those, but I'd say Instagram stories, Instagram will be sort of key ones there, and then follow that with Facebook.
Fantastic. Just following on the content piece, somebody's asked a question saying, could you expand on why messaging should not be this try to be a student? As the question, Millie asked the question, said sometimes finds it works online and in social media when brands use a different voice, etc., i.e., Marks and Spencer's on TikTok.
Yeah, I think you can use a different voice, right? But I think, for example, when I say don't be a student, I think what I mean is, imagine, this group of people here, we're not 16 to 24 years old, right? If we had a 16 to 24-year-old running a channel, you're going to get that type of conversation and content out there. I think the worst thing you can do is sort of, let's say, in your sort of late 30s, try and be cool and be one of the kids, and because you're not going to know those social nuances and you are going to get found out, and it's embarrassing. So I think it's also not very representative of your organization if you're sort of online pretending to be something that you're not. It does work in some instances, like from a copywriting perspective, right? The go-to sort of mecca brands would be Oatly and Innocent. The way they have conversational copy is excellent, but it doesn't work with every brand, and it doesn't work with every brand's current guidelines. So yeah, it's less about sort of trying to be cool, trying to be fun, and just giving students the information they need, because you're not trying to be their friend, you're trying to help them, guide them from an employer brand perspective.
Yeah, Millie says, thanks for the info. And the comment around it feeds into authenticity. I always remember years ago, this was back in brochure days, previous role, and it was professional services, and we produced what we thought was quite a good, well thought through brochure, actually, because it had the photographs, the imagery of actual people who joined the business, and it showed them in their kind of stuff, doing their hobbies, in the outdoors, that kind of stuff. And the feedback from the students was actually, do you know what, we're looking to join a city firm, we want to wear suits. That's so kind of stick with that, try not to be something you're not, and that's always stuck in my mind. I was thinking, yeah, ties into that authenticity piece. Can we talk a bit about LinkedIn, because LinkedIn's come up on a couple of questions, and funny enough, before the question came up, I was also thinking about it. LinkedIn has transformed, lateral hiring and how people do internal outsourcing, etc. We've not really seen that transformation in the graduate space. And I thought a few years ago, they're trying to make a real push into the student space. I know they did a lot of work with universities and alumni, etc. But it seems to me that's kind of gone cold in your data support. I think I'd scribble down 2% only using LinkedIn. Do you think it's LinkedIn is once people get into work? Do you see that changing? Do you think LinkedIn are going to do more? What's your thoughts on LinkedIn for students and graduates? It was Sarah who asked that question.
Yeah, definitely. I think LinkedIn is a great channel, and they did do, like you said, they did do a lot of work a few years back in terms of trying to, be on campuses, get people to sign up and so on. I don't think it's progressed as much in terms of the younger audiences when it comes to time spent on the channel. I think what a lot of I've seen from a lot of younger people, a lot of research supports that young people tend to use it a bit like a CV. You sort of go on, pop your CV up, look for a job. I've got a job now, cool. Now I'm going to spend time in places where I want to spend them. And it also comes down to that sort of work-life balance, never being stronger. So I don't know if people, particularly young people, want to necessarily spend their free time outside of work sat on LinkedIn. So that's partly it. There are certain elements, functionalities that LinkedIn are bringing in or have brought in the last couple of months that are worth looking at. So on a company page, for example, there's something called LinkedIn commitments, which is worth looking at. So if you go to your company page as an admin, you go to the edit function, there's something called commitments, which is very much focused on not just younger people, but with the view to younger people. And you can throw in your policies and documents around diversity and inclusion, sustainability, ESG, those kind of areas. And that has almost a bit of a nod to, look, I think, LinkedIn thinking they need to do a bit more for younger people that are potentially on those platforms. So yeah, it's not that it isn't the right place. It's just that unfortunately, I think young people are choosing to spend time on social networks rather than professional networks. And I think LinkedIn put a lot of time and effort in for a couple of years trying to change that behavior. And I don't think it worked, so they stopped. It's also one other thing from a targeting perspective, it's incredibly hard to target young people on LinkedIn. You can obviously target age. LinkedIn isn't particularly good at knowing people's age. And when it comes to years of experience, you can target. For example, if I had a job as a waitress for 5 years, that would assume they would put me in this kind of sort of middle management bracket, when actually that wasn't what I wanted to do, and so on. So it's a very hard targeting platform for younger people as well, and particularly if people aren't spending a lot of time on there, the cost per clicks are quite high, and then you don't get the return on investment. So it's a bit of a circle that LinkedIn need to put a lot of work into sort of resolve.
Yeah, very interesting. There's a couple of comments in the chat on LinkedIn as well. It's interesting, even a totally different market, but us running the ISE, actually we do quite a bit on LinkedIn, but actually it doesn't work for conversations. It doesn't work for actually getting groups going, and we switched to WhatsApp, and we have much better conversations and much more engagement on WhatsApp than LinkedIn. A couple more questions come through. One of the questions is about how an employer can successfully branch into using social media. So the question here talks about having some corporate channels, but not necessarily ones that they can use as a graduate recruitment team in the business. So any thoughts on how you might set up actual channels within that corporate space in your organization, I suppose, without going rogue and getting into trouble?
Yeah, indeed. And I think going rogue was the old way of doing it, because I've certainly looked after clients where there's channels for all kinds of sort of departments, and then those departments split by location, and you end up with sort of 50 groups that are not populated, they're not active, and so on. So I think, first things first, if you've got the resource or time, have a kind of quick audit of what you have, who in terms of channels, who looks after those channels, and are they accessible? So it may not be the case, you may not have to open a new channel to sort of run a careers page. You may be able to just input into the corporate channel, but equally that might not be right, because your main brand might be a consumer-facing brand, and they don't want to be spammed with employer branding. So it really depends on your sort of area of business, I think, a lot of the time, as to whether you particularly need a channel. For the most case, I think you do need those sort of standalone channels, because you need to have somewhere that people can come to and focus and not get distracted by seeing sort of product messages, service messages, and they have that kind of focus that they can scroll through the feed have a look through, and every piece of content will therefore be relevant to them. So it's kind of coming at it from a sort of auditing perspective at the beginning, and then building that into, you know, however you have the resource to do, whether it's a sort of plan on a page or a full comprehensive strategy, looking at, right, okay, where do we need to go, and what are our sort of overall business recruitment objectives, marketing objectives, and how do all of those fit in, and what budget do I have available for support? So yeah, I think that's the sort of how long is a piece of string answer.
I think also, you know, our experience is that sometimes we have to work with teams within organisations to help build a business case, and sometimes that needs actually some research, maybe some competitor analysis, looking at what other organisations are doing, and building the story and building a relationship and trust with the comms teams that may be running the corporate channels to establish and outline why those channels may not be optimal and what the risks are of using them. And it's sometimes a case that you almost need to ease into the process, and actually you start by just starting to contribute 1 or 2 components a month, but then you can prove that actually the value of that is pretty low when it comes to engagement and interaction, and start to build that case for standalone. A lot of it is as a lack of, almost like a lack of trust, and the risk that you're going to perhaps damage the corporate brand by having standalone channels. You're diluting the brand, but actually a lot of it is sort of building that case that this is where the audience are. They want to be receiving concentrated insights around this subject. And if we're using the corporate channels, unfortunately, there's 1 in 40 posts that might be related to this, and the rest are consumer based. But it's like I say, the big thing I think is building that relationship, having a conversation rather than a confrontation first, and seeing what and how we can slowly build our own sort of platforms. That seems to have been the way that's worked best. And some organisations you just can't, and actually that they want to control it through corporate channels, that's fine. Then it's a case of building that relationship as to how we can use those channels to best support what we need. But there's not one simple answer. It's often conversations, like I say, rather than running rogue. Running rogue generally doesn't work for
don't run rogue.
No,
that's not the only answer.
Not helpful, yeah. And you mentioned that sort of corporate control piece. I wonder what the current thinking is on negative posts and how they should be managed. Again, I remember going back quite a while ago to the early days of Facebook, and we had a pretty negative comment from a disgruntled graduate who left quite early, and I deliberately didn't tell the business, because our advice was actually just to let it run, and if it doesn't gain any traction, just ignore it, it'll disappear. And I knew the business would be up in arms. And when I did tell them 3 months later, they were up in arms, said, "How dare you get it off, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Well, you go and find it. If you find it, then that means the advice was wrong." And they came back and went, "Yeah, you're right, we couldn't find it." But I don't know, is that still the same? Are you best just letting that kind of conversation run for authenticity? Is it something that you need to engage actually maybe some comms professional to manage that negative stuff? What is the current thinking on that kind of content?
Yeah, I think I think that content should sometimes be taken quite seriously. If someone says something negative about your organisation, I guess the first thing to do is probably ask why they've done that, and kind of self-reflect and say to yourself, right, is that something we can fix? Is it a problem that other people are going to have as well? Or is this a case of someone who's just unhappy because maybe they didn't get a second interview and so on? So case by case, common sense sort of approach, I think. But yeah, I think always engaging with that kind of stuff, if it feels right. You know, if you were face to face with that person, and they were saying what they're saying online, how would you approach that? You know, do you think it's going to cause them to get more angry? Do you think it's going to cause them to feel better? Often with these things, it's better, if where possible, to kind of have a bit of a holding note if you need to look for information to go back to them. So rather than just leave it blank for 3 days while you go away and search, have a sort of holding note. If possible, take them to private message and still put a note up saying, look, send us a private message. But yeah, I would always say engage, deal with it, because I think there's a lot of respect in, you know, dealing with things like that and making sure that they don't just sort of sit there unchallenged because that gives off the impression that your brand doesn't really care. It's too big to worry about the sort of everyday comments. So yeah, I think engaging in that type of stuff where necessary, for particularly complex clients and particularly complex projects, you know, we'll build things like FAQs, so templated sort of answers that you can switch around and sort of adapt as you need to. And also, you know, more complex projects like escalation matrices in case there are issues that go wider than just an employer brand and that go into sort of safety issues. So yeah, there's a big piece around sort of moderation and community management that often does get overlooked. And the more content you post, the more channels you're on, the more you have to deal with that. But in a way, it's good that that's happening because it means people care enough to do it. I think there's nothing worse than just posting on stuff and having 0 comments and nobody cares either way. So that does feel like something that's sort of growing in importance as well, particularly when we look at sort of micro communities and how they're evolving.
Got it. Good. Conscious of time, we're pretty much at the end of time. We've got one last question just to get to, and that's a question talking about hashtags. And the question is, are they beneficial when putting up posts, and can they help with engagement?
Definitely, yeah. I think they work better on some channels than others. So Instagram, TikTok are really good examples of where they work. Facebook, they don't work at all really, because it doesn't have the same kind of pull through Google. Twitter, they obviously work really well, but that's not a massive platform. So yeah, I would say yes, for the most part. I think try and stick to 2 or 3, keep the posts looking quite neat, so maybe keep them at the end just from an aesthetic point of view. Don't have them like littered throughout on words that people just aren't searching for. And if you're going to use hashtags, have a look for what other people or other brands have put under those hashtags before, because the worst thing you can do is use hashtag A that no one's using, or B will just come with a load of negative bite back. So yeah, do some research before using them, but they are worth using on channels like Instagram and TikTok.
Fantastic. We're just over time there. Ben, that's been really great context. I'm sure this is going to topic we're going to come back to. Really informative. Just a reminder, we have recorded this, and we'll also get the slides out to you, so you will be able to come back to the content. We'd encourage you to share it as well. You know, we want to get our learnings and information out as much as possible to as broad an audience as possible. And we've covered some really interesting ground here on a very topical subject, particularly now we live in a hybrid world. I think the importance of online media is definitely increasing, not going backwards. And again, thanks to Ben and Ben. You know, all your support. It's partnerships with Blackbridge that really enable us to bring really rich content like this to our members. So thank you very much for your support. I think it's time for lunch if anybody's not had any. Yes, so enjoy the rest of the day. And emails there if people want to get in touch with you. Ben, is that right? Ben and Ben.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, they're both on there. And thanks for letting us present. It's been a really interesting project to work through, actually. I quite like looking at snapshots like this every now and then, so it's been good for us to pull together.
Great, and thanks for you online for engaging with the questions as well, because it's really good to have some good rich questions coming through as well. Right, that's it for now. Thanks very much, and see you all again soon. Bye now.
Bye bye.